The disguise the rain had stopped just minutes before Vin Diesel stepped out of his black SUV, but the streets of downtown Los Angeles still glistened under the warm amber glow of streetlights. The pavement smelled faintly of petrichor mixed with the ever-present aroma of the city street tacos sizzling a block away, the faint exhaust of passing cars, and the distant, muffled beat of music from some late-night rooftop bar. Vang stood there for a moment with the hood of his plain gray sweatshirt pulled up, hands deep in his pockets, taking in the sight of the restaurant just across the street. The glowing sign read Harbor and Flame, a place he had poured years of sweat and care into, not just money, but real heart. This wasn't another celebrity vanity project meant to impress friends. This was his vision come to life. A place that combined the elegance of fine dining with the comfort of a home-cooked meal. People came here for anniversaries, for celebrations, or simply to forget the weight of their day for an hour or two. And tonight, like he did every few months without warning, Vang was going in not as Vin Diesel the actor, but as a nameless, ordinary diner who wanted to feel the pulse of his own business from the inside, slipping through the entrance. Vang let the hum of the Friday dinner rush wash over him. The air was warm and fragrant with garlic butter, charred rosemary, and the unmistakable smokiness of oak-grilled steak. The golden, dim lighting gave everything a romantic haze, bouncing softly off the glassware and the polished walnut tables. Conversations overlapped in a pleasant murmur, couples leaning close over shared desserts, friends raising glasses in laughter. Servers gliding between tables with the practiced grace of people who knew exactly how to make a guest feel at ease. To anyone else, it would have seemed like the picture of perfection. But Ving knew better. Years in the restaurant industry had taught him that the true temperature of a place wasn't measured by the food or decor. It was measured in the eyes of the people working there. The smile that faltered when they turned away, the stiffness in their shoulders when a certain person entered the room, the invisible weight that couldn't be plated or poured. As he moved toward the bar, he let his gaze wander, noticing details most diners would never catch. A hostess with a bright smile, but whose hands gripped her seating chart just a little too tightly. A busboy wiping a table twice as fast when a tall man in a pressed navy shirt walked by. That man, mid-40s, clean haircut, a polished air. That suggested authority stood near the far corner of the dining floor, arms folded, scanning the room like a hawk. He wasn't simply watching, he was commanding without speaking. Vang didn't like the feel of it. Managers should guide, not loom like a shadow over the room. Just as he took a seat at the far end of the bar, his attention was drawn to a faint sound behind the low thrum of chatter and clinking cutlery. At first he thought it was just kitchen noise, the hiss of a pan, the slam of an oven door, but then it came again, softer this time and unmistakable, a stifled sob. His head turned instinctively toward a narrow hallway off to the side, the one that led to the staff break room and storage area. The door there was slightly ajar, and for a fraction of a second, Vang caught a glimpse inside, a young woman, maybe mid-20s. Still in her crisp black apron and server uniform, her head bowed so low her chin nearly touched her chest. Her hands clutched the stainless steel counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Shoulders trembled in a way that wasn't exhaustion, it was desperation. Vin's stomach tightened. He had seen servers cry before. Anyone who's worked in hospitality has, but this didn't look like the quick release of stress between shifts. This looked heavier, more dangerous. Standing just behind her, leaning slightly in as if trying to console her, was a young man in the same uniform. His lips moved quickly, whispering something Vang couldn't quite catch over the ambient noise. The woman shook her head, and though her voice was nearly inaudible, Vang swore he heard her say, "I don't have a choice. If I say no, I'm done here?" The words sent a pulse of heat through his chest, not the kind from anger alone, but from the recognition of a situation he had seen too many times before. For a moment, he considered walking over immediately, asking her if she was all right, but he stopped himself. Right now, to everyone in this room, he was just another customer in a hoodie, and that anonymity was a powerful tool. If he revealed himself too soon, the answers he was looking for would vanish behind polite lies and forced smiles. No, if he wanted to know the truth, he had to earn it. He leaned back on his stool, ordering only a water from the bartender who greeted him, and let his eyes drift without drawing attention. From his peripheral vision, he saw the young man in the break room give the woman's shoulder a final squeeze. Before slipping out onto the floor, his face tight, his movements quick, Vin's gaze followed him, noting his name tag. Tyler. As the kid passed by the bar, Vin caught his attention with a quiet, "Hey, got a pen I could borrow?" Tyler stopped, a little startled, but nodded, fishing one from the pocket of his apron and handing it over. Vin took it, but instead of immediately writing anything, he gave a small, casual smile. "Thanks, your friend back there. She's okay?" The way Tyler's body tensed at the question told Vin more than any words could. His jaw worked like he wanted to answer, but his eyes flicked just briefly toward the man in the navy shirt still prowling the floor. "She's fine," Tyler said quickly, too quickly, the kind of reflex answer that existed only to end a conversation. Vin kept his tone light, his posture easy. "Doesn't look fine?" Tyler hesitated, glanced at the manager again, then looked down at the stack of menus in his hands. "It's nothing," he muttered, but the subtle quiver in his voice betrayed him. And before Vin could press, a new tension rolled through the air. He didn't even have to turn around to know why the tall man in the navy shirt was approaching. First clues, the man in the navy shirt closed the distance with the kind of controlled stride that made people instinctively shift out of the way. His eyes, sharp, cold, calculating, locked onto Tyler before briefly flicking to Vin, as if scanning him like an inventory item. Up close, Vin could read the subtler signs, the slight lift of his chin that telegraphed superiority, the carefully pressed sleeves rolled to mid-forearm to show just enough muscle without breaking the polished image, and the faint, dismissive curl at the corner of his mouth. This was someone used to power in small, daily doses, the kind you can't measure in dollars but in the way people flinch when you pass. "Everything all right here?" the man asked, his tone smooth but carrying a weight beneath it, a message meant only for Tyler. The server stiffened, clutching the menus tighter. "Yes, sir. Just helping a guest," he replied, his eyes firmly on the menus as if they were the most fascinating objects in the room. Vin offered an easy smile, keeping his voice mild. "Yeah, Tyler was just lending me a pen. Appreciate it." The man whose name tag now clearly read R. Calloway nodded, but the gesture was slow, deliberate, his gaze never leaving Vin's face. "Good," he said finally, placing a firm, almost performative hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Let's stay. Focus tonight, Tyler, busy floor." The pressure of his grip wasn't visible, but Vin could see the subtle twitch in Tyler's jaw, the way his breath caught for half a second before he nodded and muttered, "Yes, sir." Vin said nothing, but inside his mind pieces began shifting into place. He had known many managers in his life, both in Hollywood and in the restaurants he'd owned, and he could tell the difference between someone running a tight ship and someone ruling through intimidation. Calloway was the latter, and people like him often hid their worst behavior behind closed doors, where no one of authority was watching. Vin's jaw tightened slightly, but he made a mental note to keep his cover. Vin's instincts were screaming now, but instincts weren't proof. If he wanted to understand exactly what was happening, he needed more than observation. He needed someone willing to talk. And that meant finding the right person. Fate seemed to oblige. 10 minutes later, as the dinner rush began to settle into a slower rhythm, the bartender from early 20s, sandy-haired, name tag reading Nate stepped outside through the side door for what was clearly a break. Vin waited half a minute, then slipped off his stool and followed, pulling his hood up against the cool night air. Outside, Nate was leaning against the building, scrolling absently through his phone, the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingering. Nearby, though he wasn't smoking, Vin approached casually, hands in his pockets. "Long night?" he asked, as if making idle conversation. Nate glanced up, startled at first, but relaxed when he recognized him as just another customer. "Fridays are always like this," he said with a shrug. Vin leaned against the wall, a few feet away, adopting a tone that was part curiosity, part shared weariness. "Mind if I ask you something? That guy inside Calloway, what's he like?" Nate hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the door instinctively before returning to his phone. He's particular, he said carefully. Wants everything his way, real stickler for rules. Veng tilted his head, letting the silence stretch just enough to make the bartender uncomfortable. That normal for managers here. Nate exhaled slowly, lowering his phone and glancing around to make sure no one was within earshot. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, edged with something heavier. Look, I don't know what you've seen, but he's not just strict. Nate stopped, searching for the right word, then dropped his gaze and muttered, He's got a thing for Emily. Veng stayed perfectly still, though inside his chest the anger flared. Emily, he repeated softly. The server? Nate nodded, his expression grim. She's the only one he makes stay late. Always calls her into the office after closing. Says it's to go over paperwork or review her performance, but we've all seen the way she tenses when he comes near her. She never says anything, but she doesn't have to. You can feel it. Vin's hands curled slightly in his sweatshirt pocket. He'd seen this pattern too many times before, a man in a position of authority isolating someone vulnerable, using their job as leverage. She ever talked to anyone about it? No, Nate said quickly. She can't afford to lose this job. She takes every extra shift, works doubles, says it's for her mom's medical bills. That last detail hit Veng like a hammer. This wasn't just about a toxic work environment. This was about survival for her. And predators like Calloway thrived on people who couldn't walk away. Veng straightened slowly, his mind already shifting into the calculated mode he'd used in 100 different high-pressure situations. He wasn't just going to get to the bottom of this, he was going to end it. But to do that, he needed to see the full picture. And that meant getting closer to Emily without Calloway catching on. The truth surfaces. Veng returned inside with the same unhurried stride he had used walking out, the hood still drawn loosely over his head, his expression unreadable. The restaurant had begun its gradual transition from the dinner rush to the softer rhythm of late service. Conversations were quieter now, the clink of forks and knives giving way to the occasional laugh or the muffled hum of background music. But Veng wasn't listening to any of it. His eyes were searching for Emily. She was moving between tables near the back corner, balancing a tray with 2 steaming bowls of pasta. Her smile was polite, practiced, and almost convincing to an untrained eye, but Veng could see the hollowness beneath it. She thanked her customers, set down their food, and vanished toward the service station with mechanical precision. She didn't linger to chat, didn't glance toward her coworkers for shared laughter. She was working like someone who just wanted to get through the night without drawing attention. Veng knew the first approach mattered. If he came at her too directly, she might shut down, afraid of the consequences. So he waited until she was at the water station alone, refilling a row of glasses with the silver pitcher, her back to the floor. He stepped up casually, resting his forearm lightly on the counter beside her. "You've got the quiet efficiency thing down," he said softly, his tone pitched somewhere between a compliment and an observation. She glanced up, startled, and for a second her eyes flicked toward the dining room entrance where Calloway had been moments earlier. "Thanks," she said after a beat, her voice calm but lacking the spark of someone who truly appreciated the comment. She turned back to the glasses, the water pitcher steady in her hands. Veng leaned slightly closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough that she could hear him clearly over the low background noise. "I was just outside, talked to Nate." He let the words hang, watching her reaction. Her hands paused mid-pour, the stream of water trembling before she steadied it again. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Veng continued, keeping his voice low and even. "But I can see you're carrying more than just trays tonight." She set the pitcher down, turning to face him fully now, though her posture was guarded. Her eyes, tired, rimmed faintly red, searched his face for something, some indication of what he really wanted. "Why do you care?" she asked, not with hostility, but with the quiet weariness of someone who had stopped expecting strangers to intervene. "Because I've been in enough places like this to know when something's wrong," Veng replied. And because the way you looked in that break room earlier, that's not just a bad shift, that's something else. Her shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath, and for a moment he thought she might turn away. But then she spoke, each word careful, deliberate. If I tell you, it doesn't change anything. People like him, they don't get removed. They remove you. Vin's jaw tightened, but his gaze stayed steady. Then maybe you need someone he can't remove. She gave a short, humorless laugh that held no real amusement. And who exactly would that be? Corporate? HR? They've known about him for years. They just call him effective. He let that sit for a moment, then said quietly, "Try me." Emily's guard wavered. She glanced over her shoulder again, scanning the room to make sure Calloway wasn't within earshot. Satisfied for the moment, she stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been targeting me since my 3rd month here. At first it was little things keeping me late, finding excuses to train me alone. Then it became—" She trailed off, swallowing hard, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Vin's shoulder. "If I don't agree to stay when he tells me to, he takes shifts away. Last month he cut my hours so much I couldn't pay my mom's hospital bill. Then, when I said I'd work whatever he needed, suddenly my schedule was full again." Vince's blood ran hot, the kind of quiet fury that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with justice. "So he's holding your job over you?" She nodded once, quickly, like she couldn't bear to say it out loud. "And he's smart about it. Never anything in writing. Never in front of anyone who would report it. He keeps everyone just scared. Enough not to get involved. Tyler he tries to stick up for me, but Calloway threatened to fire him too." Vin's mind was already mapping the situation. This wasn't just about confronting a bad manager. This was about dismantling a system. A fear that had been allowed to root itself deep inside a place he had built to be the opposite of this. "Emily," he said slowly, "I need you to trust me when I say you're not alone in this anymore." She looked at him skeptically, her lips pressing together as if she wanted to believe him but couldn't afford the risk of hope. "Trust." "Doesn't pay my rent," she murmured, and then, almost apologetically, "I appreciate you asking, but you should just enjoy your dinner." She turned back to the water station, picking up the pitcher again, the conversation clearly over. In her mind, Vang didn't push. He knew enough now to confirm what Nate had told him, and pushing harder would only make her retreat. Instead, he stepped back, nodding once. "All right. I'll enjoy my dinner, but I'll also be here a while." As he walked away, he could feel her eyes on his back for just a second before she turned away. He took his seat at the bar again, but his thoughts were already 10 steps ahead. This wasn't going to be solved by quiet conversations and subtle hints. If Calloway thought he was untouchable, then Vang needed to show him just how wrong he was. But first, he needed to gather. More voices, more proof. And for that, he would need to play a longer game tonight. Quiet investigation. Vang stayed at the bar far longer than any normal diner would, ordering slowly, making casual conversation with the bartender when needed, but mostly letting his presence fade into the background. The hood helped, but so did the way he carried himself, calm, unassuming, like a man killing time instead of one dissecting every movement in the room. He wasn't here for the food tonight, he was here to watch. And from his vantage point with a direct view of the dining floor, the hallway to the break room, and the manager's roaming path, he could see the undercurrent of tension more clearly than ever. It was like watching a play where half the dialogue was unspoken but still deafening. Calloway moved like a man who believed the entire room was an extension of his own authority. He never raised his voice, but his presence bent the air around him. When he stopped at a table to check in, the server's smile would tighten just a fraction. When he passed a busboy, their pace would quicken. But it was Emily who bore the brunt of his focus. Twice in the last half hour, Vang saw him intercept her near the kitchen doors. Both times, the conversations were short, barely 5 seconds, but both ended the same way. Emily would walk away faster, her shoulders hunched in just a little more than before, her face set in that neutral mask she'd perfected over months of surviving. Vang knew there was no way to blow this open without more. then his own observations. He needed the staff to talk, and to do that he needed them to know they could. The trick was making it happen without drawing Calloway's suspicion. The opportunity came when a lull hit the bar. Nate, the bartender, was polishing glasses, his movement steady but his eyes darting occasionally toward the floor like he was keeping tabs on something. Vang leaned forward slightly, his voice low enough to be drowned out by the hum of conversation. "You ever think about working somewhere else?" Nate glanced at him, then smirked faintly. "Every time Calloway breathes near me," he said under his breath. Then, a beat later, "But good jobs aren't exactly growing on trees right now." "That's the problem, isn't it?" Vang replied, his tone casual but laced with meaning. "Makes it easy for someone like him to think he's safe." Nate's eyes narrowed slightly, the unspoken question hanging in the air. "You're not just here for dinner, are you?" Vang met his gaze evenly. "Let's just say I don't like watching good people get steamrolled." The bartender studied him for a moment, weighing something internally, then gave the smallest of nods. "You want to know who else has seen it?" "Everyone," Vang guessed. "Pretty much," Nate admitted. "But Tyler, he's seen the worst." "Emily trusts him more than anyone." Vang already suspected as much, but having Nate confirm it made his next step easier. "Then tell him I'm someone worth talking to, quietly." Within 20 minutes, Tyler found an excuse to pass behind the bar, dropping a roll of silverware at the service counter near Vin's seat. He didn't stop moving, but he murmured, 5 minutes. Back hall by the storage closet. Vang finished his drink at an unhurried pace, then slipped away from the bar, weaving through the dining room with the ease of someone who knew how to disappear into a crowd. The hallway by the storage closet was dimly lit and half-blocked by stacked crates of wine and soda deliveries. Tyler was already there, his hands shoved into his apron pockets. Glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, "I don't have long," Tyler said immediately, his voice tight. "He's been watching me ever since you talked to Emily." Vang stepped in close enough that they could keep their voices low without risk. "I need to know exactly how bad it is." "Not just for her, for all of you." Tyler hesitated, then exhaled. Sharply, the decision made. He singles her out. Everyone knows it. The way he schedules, the way he talks to her, it's not just creepy, it's calculated. If she doesn't play along, she loses shifts. If she complains, he threatens to write her up for made-up things. Once, he accused her of shorting a table on wine just because she didn't stay after hours when he asked. Vin's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Anyone ever report him?" Tyler gave a humorless laugh. "To who?" "Corporate likes him because the numbers look good. Turnover is high, but they don't care. The servers who quit just vanish from the schedule, and nobody asks questions. The ones who stay keep their heads down." Vang could hear the frustration. In his voice, anger mixed with resignation, the kind that comes from watching a bad system chew people up. "You want this to stop?" Vang asked. Tyler looked at him hard, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, but wanting it and making it happen aren't the same thing." Vang leaned in slightly. "In this case, they are." Before Tyler could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Both men froze for a fraction of a second before. Tyler moved, grabbing a box from the stack and carrying it toward the kitchen as if that had been his purpose all along. Vang turned toward the dining room, his expression neutral, blending back into the role of a late-night customer out for a quiet meal. Back at the bar, he caught sight of Emily again, taking an order at a table near the window. Her smile looked even more brittle now, but Vang saw something else in her eyes, a flicker of awareness. She knew he was still watching, still here. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe he wouldn't be leaving any time soon. Vang took a slow breath. His mind settled. A visible shift moved through the room. The staff stood straighter. Emily set her tray down on the nearest counter and folded her arms, watching with a mixture of fear and something else, the faintest spark of relief. "I've spoken to my people tonight," Vang said, his voice now carrying a steel edge. "They didn't have to tell me much. The way you run this floor tells me enough. You've built your own little kingdom here, Rick, but it's not yours to keep." "Not anymore." Calloway's eyes darted to the staff gathered at the back, then back to Vang. "You're making a mistake," he said, trying for authority but sounding less certain now. "The only mistake," Vang replied, "was letting someone—" "Like you think this was acceptable. You're done here." "Effective immediately." For a long beat, Calloway didn't move. The silence in the restaurant was almost tangible, every breath from the staff and diners held as they waited. Then, in a small display of defiance, Calloway straightened his shoulders. "You think you can just walk in and—" Vang stepped closer. Close enough that the space between them felt charged. "I don't think, Rick. I know. And I'm not just walking in, I'm taking back what's mine." The finality in his tone left no opening for argument. Slowly, Calloway glanced around at the room, clearly searching for someone to back him up. No one moved. The staff kept their eyes fixed on Vang, the unspoken loyalty shifting in the air. Even the diners sat frozen, unwilling to break the moment. Finally, Calloway set down his clipboard, his hand gripping it just a little too tightly, and walked toward the door. His steps were measured, but the silence behind him felt heavier than any goodbye. When the door shut, it was like a dam had broken. The staff exhaled almost in unison. Emily leaned against the counter, her hands trembling slightly, though whether from shock or relief Vang couldn't tell yet. He turned to face them all, letting the quiet settle for just a moment before he spoke again. "This place was built to be more than just a restaurant," he said, his voice softer now but still carrying. "It's supposed to be a home for everyone. Who works here? That changes tonight. No more fear. No more looking over your shoulder. If you've got a problem, you come to me directly. And if anyone treats you with anything less than respect, they're gone. No warnings." There was no applause, no dramatic cheer, just the kind of silence that came from people trying to process the fact that their reality had shifted in the span of 5 minutes. And that was exactly how Vang wanted it. Real change didn't need theatrics. It needed action that would last long after the moment passed. The transformation the door had barely closed behind. Rick Calloway when the tension in the room seemed to dissolve into something fragile and unfamiliar, stillness. It wasn't relief yet, not fully. It was the pause that comes when a long, unspoken fear has been cut loose, but the people it held still need to believe they're free. Vang stood in the center of the dining room, the last traces of confrontation fading from his voice, replaced with something steadier, warmer. He wanted them to hear not just authority, but intention. He looked at each member of the staff in turn, the busboys clutching their towels, the line cooks who had wandered out from the kitchen in their stained aprons, the hostess who stood, frozen at her podium, her wide eyes flicking between him and the rest of the room. And then his gaze found Emily. She hadn't moved from the counter where she'd set down her tray earlier, her hand still resting on its edge, her body angled, as if ready to retreat if the moment turned sour. Her eyes met his for a second, then darted away. That single, guarded motion told Vang everything. She wanted to believe this was real, but she'd lived under the weight of false promises before. "First thing," Vang said, breaking the silence. In a tone that left no doubt, "You're all getting paid for the rest of tonight's shift. And tomorrow's meeting, mandatory for everyone, will be paid too. Because I want you here without the excuse of, 'It's my day off.' I want you to know that your time matters to me." He paused, letting that settle before continuing. "Second, there will be a direct line from every one of you to me. No filter, no going through a chain of people who don't have your back. If something's wrong, I hear it first." A ripple of glances passed through the group. It wasn't applause or smiles yet, but it was movement, the slow return of energy into people who had been drained dry by caution. Vang shifted his focus to Emily. "You," he said gently, and she looked up at once, startled. "Come here." She hesitated, scanning the faces of her co-workers, as if unsure whether stepping forward would single her out in a dangerous way. But then Tyler gave her a subtle nod from the back of the group, and she moved, her steps measured until she stood a few feet from Vang, up close. He could see the signs exhaustion had etched into her, the faint dark circles, the slight tremor in her fingers, the wary set of her mouth. "You've been holding up more than your share for a long time," Vang said, his voice low enough that it was for her first and the room second. "That ends tonight." Starting tomorrow, you're being promoted to floor captain. You'll get a raise, you'll set the tone for service, and you'll have my full authority to protect the people on this team." For the first time since he'd walked in that night, Emily's expression cracked, not into a smile, but into something softer, something that looked dangerously close to relief. I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Say." "You'll take it," Ving replied. She nodded, a little too quickly, as if afraid the offer might vanish if she waited. "I'll take it." "Good," Ving said, giving a small, approving nod before turning back to the staff. "And for the rest of you, we're starting fresh. This place is going to run the way it was always meant to. No fear, no favoritism, no games. We respect each other, we look out for each other, and we remember why people come here in the first place. Not just for the food, but for how we make them feel." The room was silent for a moment, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the brittle quiet of intimidation. It was the steady, grounded pause before something new begins. Then Nate, still behind the bar, set down the glass he'd been polishing and said, "Guess I'll drink to that," his voice light but carrying enough to break the tension. A ripple of quiet laughter followed, small, tentative, but real. Veng smiled faintly, knowing that change didn't come in an explosion of celebration. It came in these first, cautious steps. "All right," he said. "Finish your side work, close out your sections, and go home, rest, tomorrow. We build this place back the way it should be." One by one, the staff moved back to their stations. But the air was different now. Shoulders weren't quite as tight. Footsteps weren't quite as heavy. Even Emily, still quiet, walked with her chin a little higher. When the last table was cleared and the last chairs stacked, Veng lingered at the door, watching them trickle out into the cool night air. Emily was the last to leave, pausing just long enough to glance back at him. "Thank you," she said simply, but her tone carried the weight of someone who didn't say those words lightly. Veng gave a small nod. "You've got nothing to thank me for yet. Let's see where we are a month from now." She smiled, faint but genuine this time, and stepped out into the street. Veng turned back into the empty restaurant, the warm glow from the pendant lights catching on the polished wood and gleaming silverware. For the first time that night, he let out a long breath, the knot in his chest loosening. This place would survive. Not because he'd fired a bad manager, but because the people who made it special finally had the space to breathe again. He locked the door behind him, stepped out into the night, and walked toward his car. The city hummed around him, unaware of the small, quiet revolution that had just taken place inside Harbor and Flame, and Veng knew, without question, that the heart of his restaurant and the people who kept it alive were safe again.